So today I'd like to sort of introduce you first to the aquaceutical technology. The aquaceutical technology really is a combination of cellular hydration and cellular nutrition. One of the interesting things and why I got into this technology was back in, and again, this is roughly 15 years ago, there were some studies that were published in the European Union. In these studies, and they were in 2011, it was very interesting. And the study was, if you can see my cursor, cellular hydration. And in this study, the EU banned the claim that water can prevent dehydration. And so when people sell bottles of water, they could not make the claim that if you drink water, it will prevent dehydration. Only in the European Union could you spend 5 million euros with 22 researchers to prove water doesn't prevent dehydration. But the funny thing is, it's true. And the interesting thing is that almost the more water, people who drink a lot of water are still chronically dehydrated. In fact, the more water you drink, the more dehydrated you get. And so in the same study on this right-hand side, it also says that the water you drink does keep you cool and it provides blood hydration. But the interesting thing about this study was that when you drink water, it can get into your blood, but it doesn't necessarily get into your tissue, your cells, your skin. And so when you drink a lot of water, trying to get hydrated, especially women, but men too, you become bloated and have to urinate and go to the bathroom a lot. But more than nutrition, chronic dehydration causes a tremendous amount of health issues. When you're chronically dehydrated, you have dry skin, you have lack of energy, you have brain fog. And so the question that came up 2011, when I first started this process, was why does normal water not get absorbed? And what could I do to change the nature of water so that it would become absorbed at the cellular level? And so the aquaceutical technology is trying to get water out of the stomach into the blood, and then out of the blood into the interstitial fluid. The interstitial fluid is what surrounds every cell. But that water also has to be able to penetrate the cell. And so on the right-hand side, this yellow box, it says normal water gets into the blood, but the aquaceutical water is smaller. It's about 1/10 the size, and it's able to penetrate into the cells. And so that's what sort of the first step is. Before I talk about the nutrients, I'd like to help understand the water itself. So water is a very, very small molecule, and it's polar, which means there's a minus and a plus. So it's like magnets. And so the hydrogen plus binds with the oxygen negative, and as this happens in lots of different situations, it forms clusters of water molecules. And these big clusters of water molecules are too big, they get into the blood, but they're too big to get into tissue. And so these large clusters of water also typically have something in the middle. This can be a large mineral, it can be a chemical, but something is typically in the middle of this cluster. So what the goal of is the aquaceutical technology is to break the big cluster to mini clusters. So this black, whatever's in the middle, like sometimes it's medicines, it's minerals, it's poisons, it can be anything. What we want to do is take out the bad nutrient and make tiny water clusters with the nutrient that we want in the water in the middle. So if you notice, I put a golf ball here, and that's going to be important in just a minute. So what we try to do is take these big clumps, and so the process is you take the large water clusters and we make ultra pure water. So in ultra pure water, you take every impurity out of the water. So in water purification, they have reverse osmosis water, distilled water, double distilled water, triple distilled water. If you keep purifying, it gets down to ultra pure water. The important thing about ultra pure water is that you want to make sure that everything is out of the water before you nanosize or nanotize the ingredients. Then with that water, what I call stretch that water. So what you want to do is when you ultra purify the water, I hate to try to go back again, but back to this slide. Water has a set angle here. It's 104 degrees. And so to stretch the water, what we do is you expand it by putting it into an electromagnetic field. And it actually pulls the water cluster apart. Then from the nutrient size, we take large nutrient particles and we nanotize them. So, and I'd like to come back to that later, but these nanoparticles are then introduced into the water molecules. And when you collapse the field, the electromagnetic field, it makes the aquaceutical particle. It's the small clusters of water with the nutrient in the middle. So in essence, if we can, hold on one second. So you stretch the water cluster and you take the nanonutrients and it flows into the middle, and then you collapse the field and you have the tiny water cluster with a nutrient in the middle. So that as you drink the Sealy product, these water clusters can flow into your body, into your blood, but they're also small enough that they can flow into the interstitial fluid and into the cells. From our size, the size of our body. And so it's hard to imagine when you see something like a piece of salt that's so small, it seems like it would be easy to absorb. It seems so small. But if you think of, and Matt, put yourself, instead of thinking you as a human, picture yourself on the surface of a cell. And so as you stand on the cell, in order to get anything into a cell, it has to go through a hole. And for today's analogy, I'm going to play this golf analogy, and that this is the hole of a golf course, and you need to get these nutrients or water into this hole. This can be minerals, it can be protein, it can be anything. In order to get into a cell, it has to be about 50 nanometers. And so some people think that nano is scary, but our bodies are nanotizing machines. So everything you eat has to be nanotized inside our body to go into this hole. So before we eat something, we chop it, we cut it, we cook it, we make it soft. We have enzymes in our mouth. It gets dissolved in our stomach with acid. It then can get absorbed, or enzymes in the small intestine. And in the small intestine, and we'll come back to this later, it has to be broken down under 200 nanometers. But the smaller, the better. And do you know what? For most men, you never say smaller is better, but in nutrition it is. So out of the intestines, it gets to the liver. And the liver also has enzymes and breaks things down. And so at that point, if it is not the size of a golf ball, 30 to 50 nanometers, it is not going to be absorbed in a cell. So I think when people think of nanotechnology being scary, it's when they're making things nano-sized, which aren't naturally nano. So you have nano robots or nanoparticles that aren't natural, that are designed through technology to do things within the body. And that is scary. But what we do is, at Sealy, what we try to do are take natural, healthy ingredients, we purify the water and break down those nutrients that you need in the cells so that they can be easily absorbed into the body. One of the reasons this is really important is especially for people who are sick or have stress and anxiety. Because typically people who have some sort of a medical condition, or they're stressed and anxious, depressed, their stomach and intestines don't work properly. And so even when they eat healthy, it doesn't necessarily mean that the enzymes in their stomach, intestines are working properly. And so that's why I think people who are on Sealy Swish, Sealy Ageless, Relief, they feel a huge benefit, not just because of the cellular hydration, but the cellular nutrients. Okay, so back to thinking of yourself on the surface of a cell. As humans, in human size, I look at powder as being very, very small. So in chemistry, the principle is the finer, the smaller I can grind this, it will be easier to absorb. And so when you look at the pills that people take, these have to be broken down in the stomach and intestines to release the nutrient. When you look at salt in the middle picture, you have big salt, medium salt, small salt, fine salt. the smaller the salt, the easier it is to absorb. You have capsules that have fine powder. But the interesting thing is the more energy I put in to grinding a powder, it actually introduces binding force to it. It's called zeta potential. It's like static electricity. When this fine powder is dry, it's very beautiful. But when I put this powder into water, it clumps. The problem is our body is water. And so when I take this pill and it dissolves in my stomach, it makes a big clump. So if you look at the smallest little particle here, like the smallest one you can see, the idea is to take that one particle and break it into tinier particles. So you take this one particle, which is the glass, and you break it up into a trillion particles. So, like I said, when you nanotize a particle, it's dry, it's not that hard. But when you put it in water, it clumps. So it's important when you nanosize something or nanotize something and you put it in water, you need to put something around it so that the particles can't clump. So this picture was taken during COVID when we were supposed to stay 6 feet apart. We were stupid then. But in this powder, imagine this lady and this guy are nanoparticles, and we're trying to keep them apart when we put them in water. So you can coat this nanoparticle with something not natural. So they have liposomes and mycelials and polymer coatings, different things to keep nanoparticles apart. But none of this is necessarily healthy. And so with the aquaceutical technology is we actually use the water to keep the nanoparticles apart. The other interesting thing about water is that it transmits frequency. And so the particle inside the water can say, I'm vitamin C or I'm vitamin D. It can, and that frequency can go outside the water, so it becomes an intelligent nutrient with hydration. So I'm going back to the absorption, and in your stomach, things get digested and they go into your small intestine. And each of these tubes seems pretty small. But each of these tubes also has little tubes on them. And at the tip of each of these little things are little hair. And so each of these is coated with tiny hair, and this is what absorbs nutrients. So one of the reasons also why nanowater, the water clusters help absorption is that when you get into the stomach lining, the nanonutrients in the water can flow in between all of these, the fingers and the hair. And it can happen very quickly because water flows in between all of these easily. You can imagine large particles that just sit and absorb here and have to be digested before it can even begin to be absorbed. And so when we think back to the size of a cell, standing on a cell, they have these little channels that absorb nutrients and water. And if I think of this like the hole on a golf course and the size of a golf ball to go in, if you were to go back to that tiny, tiny piece of salt that we talked about, and I dissolve it in water, it becomes 600 nanometers. So when I dissolve salt in water, it's 600 nanometers, which is the equivalent of 900 millimeters, I mean, roughly 3 feet. And so this size, 3 feet in diameter, will not go in that hole. So even though as a human, I dissolve that salt and I drink it, I think it will be absorbed, but the body still has to break it down. So thinking back from you at the size of, I'm standing on a cell, this 900 millimeter ball is a dissolved nutrient in water. So my question is, that tiny piece of dry salt, how big do you think it would be? That tiny piece of salt that you can barely see, the smallest one, is the size of your TV tower. That it's unbelievable sometimes when you think of nutrition and the size that things have to be, because that little piece of salt we can barely see, but to a cell it looks like that. And so what is the difference it makes when you can hydrate cells? You get cellular hydration and cellular nutrition. So one of the studies we did a while back was with chickens. So chickens for meat grow, well, you can change it, but 45 days. And in 45 days, a chicken should be 6 pounds. These chickens, because of health of conditions, a lot of times people give them medicated feed food with antibiotics in it. And so the question, when the researchers came to us and said, can you give these chickens nano water that could help boost their immune system so they don't need antibiotics? And so it was interesting. These chickens got, it's not exactly Sealy Swish, but it's really close. So you're drinking chicken water. But the thing is when we gave the chickens this product, it wasn't any immune building nutrients. It was general health nutrients, under the idea that if you make the animals healthier in general, they can fight disease on their own. These chickens received about 1 ounce, 30 milliliters over the 45 days. The birds gained extra weight. They gained 8% of weight. They looked healthier, higher bone density, higher tissue moisture. And as part of this test, we had to test the organs, the liver, kidney, different organs, and there was no genetic tissue changes in the animals. The death loss went down, better average daily gain of weight by giving them a tiny bit of nano water every day. And so you see that by just hydration and nanonutrition, it has a dramatic effect, surprising effect on the health of the animals. One other study we did, are any questions about this? Okay, let's move on. And then we can come back. But the next one is a fertilizer study. And this is to grow alfalfa plants for animal feed. And in this study, we we compared standard fertilizer with aquaceutical fertilizer. The aquaceutical fertilizer replaced, down at the bottom, 150 liters of liquid fertilizer to 100 milliliters. So we used 100 milliliters of fertilizer, nanotized, instead of 150 liters. And so in this study, up at the top, it was 1/1500th the amount of fertilizer. Or if you look at the bottom, it was 0.07%, 99.9% less. With that small amount of nano fertilizer, the tissue moisture was higher with aquaceutical, meaning the cells of the plant were able to absorb the water. The soil moisture was double. Because the water clusters are smaller, it's actually able to penetrate the soil easier and stay there. Then when we analyzed the plants themselves, even though it was 99.9% less, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium increased in the plant tissue. And so you start to understand a little bit that when you take the wrong size of nutrient, it does not work. Our bodies, animal bodies, plants need to have nanotized nutrients. And it's not about how much you take, it really is about the form that you take it in. The last thing that I'd like to highlight is at the bottom line, which is the protein content. The value when you give feed to animals, the protein content of the animal makes a huge difference. And what we found is that by just increasing the health of the plant, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium all went up. But what we found was that the protein, by having a healthier plant, the protein content also increased naturally. And so with Sealy Swish and Sealy Swish Ageless and some of these products, we're not necessarily trying to give you ingredients to heal any disease. The core purpose is to give cellular hydration and core cellular nutrition so that the cells can do what they do and let the body heal itself. You're trying to normalize that body back into homeostasis and letting the body do what it was designed to do. Good question. When we did this chicken study, it was 15 years ago. And if someone's sick today, I recommend them taking a little bit more than a capful or taking several caps a day. Back then, we were still playing with how much people had to take. The other thing, while we're there, one of the other interesting things about the chicken study was chickens drink dirty water. And so in the chicken, where the chickens lived, they would take well water and fill the buckets, and we would add the aquaceutical water to it. And there was some question whether or not, at the time, whether or not the aquaceutical cluster was stable enough that it wouldn't get degraded when you mixed it with other water. And so with the chicken study, even with the agriculture study, where we combined the fertilizer water with with irrigation water, is the nano clusters, the water clusters, seem to be stable even when mixed with other liquids. And so because even when you take that cap full of water and you drink it, it's being mixed with other liquids. And we wanted to make sure that as you mix, even if you were to take that cap full of nano water and add it to a tea or a drink, We still absolutely believe that it's stable. Daniel, thank you for inviting me, and anytime.